The morning I found out they were selling my company, I was on my knees scrubbing a bathroom on the 3rd floor. Not metaphorically, literally. Yellow gloves, industrial cleaner, the whole thing. The kind of work that makes you invisible. And that's exactly why I was doing it. My name is Marcus Aldrin. I'm 34 years old. And for 11 months, I worked as a contracted janitor inside Aldrin Coal Industrial Supply, a company that did $47 million in revenue last year. A company I owned 51% of. Nobody knew. Not the receptionist who handed me my visitor badge every morning. Not the VP of operations who walked past me without blinking. Not the security guard who called me buddy. And not my father, Raymond Aldrin, who ran the company from a corner office on the 5th floor with a view of the Columbus skyline. He had no idea his janitor was his son. Let me back up. My mother Diane died when I was 9. Breast cancer, stage 4. She was 32, which means she was exactly my age right now when her body gave out. I don't talk about her much because when I do, I have to stop whatever I'm doing and just sit for a minute. After she died, my father didn't fall apart. He got colder, more focused. He poured everything into the business and handed me off to my maternal grandfather, Earl Whitfield. Grandpa Earl was a retired civil engineer from Dayton, Ohio, who wore flannel shirts, made his own bread, and had the sharpest legal mind of anyone I've ever known despite never spending a day in law school. He read contracts the way other people read novels, and he did not trust Raymond Aldrin, not even a little. He let me spend weekends with my father until I was about 13. Then something happened. I still don't know the full story. And my grandfather got a restraining order that kept Raymond away for almost 2 years. By the time it expired, I was 15 and I'd stopped trying. Some relationships don't recover. Ours didn't. Grandpa Earl raised me. He taught me to read a balance sheet before I could drive. He showed me how vendor contracts worked, how shell companies hid liabilities, how people stole from businesses in slow, quiet ways that never showed up on the surface. A man who builds something, he told me once, should make sure it doesn't get taken from him while he's not watching. He was talking about my father. I didn't understand that until later. Earl died on a Tuesday in March 3 years ago. Cardiac arrest. He was 79, alone in his kitchen, and gone before the ambulance arrived. The grief hit me like a physical blow. 3 days where I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Just sat in his house surrounded by his flannel shirts and his bread pans and his folders. His folders, that's where I found it. His attorney, a woman named Patricia Voss out of Franklin County, had been managing a document for 11 years. A quiet, legal, fully executed transfer of shares. When Aldrin Coal was incorporated, my father had given Earl a 51% stake as a form of silent partnership. A favour, a thank you, something Raymond assumed was temporary and informal. It was not informal. Earl had made sure of that. And 3 months before he died, working with Patricia quietly and without telling anyone, he had transferred every one of those shares to me. Not to my father. Not to his estate. To me. I owned controlling interest in my father's company. I had owned it for 3 months and didn't know it. I sat with that for a long time. I want you to understand something. My first instinct wasn't to walk in through the front door. My first instinct wasn't revenge either. I'm not built that way. Grandpa Earl used to say, emotion is a reaction. Strategy is a decision. He said it so many times it's basically tattooed on my brain. So I called Patricia Voss. We met at a diner in Gahanna on a Wednesday afternoon. She was 68, silver-haired, wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and had a handshake like a contractor. She put a folder on the table before I even sat down. Your grandfather expected you to find this, she said. He also expected you to sit on it. He said, and I'm quoting, Marcus will know when. I asked her what the shares were worth. She slid a single page across the table. A valuation from 14 months prior. I looked at the number. I looked up at her. That's current, I asked. That's conservative, she said. I didn't tell anyone. Not my girlfriend Dana, not my college roommate. Nobody. I spent 2 months studying the company from the outside. Public filings, vendor lists, news mentions, anything I could find. And then I did something that, looking back, was either brilliant or insane. I applied for a janitorial contract through a facilities company called CleanCore Services. Commercial cleaning, third-party contractor, $18.40 an hour. I use my middle name, Marcus James, on the application. Different last name, a different email, a different number. 2 weeks later, I had a badge. My first day, I walked through the lobby of Aldrin Coal Industrial Supply as an employee. I pushed a cart with mop handles and a grey bucket past the front desk, past the receptionist, past the oil painting of my father shaking hands with the Columbus Chamber of Commerce. He looked good in the painting. I kept walking. The first few weeks were quiet. I cleaned bathrooms, I emptied trash bins. I learned the building's rhythms. Who left early, who stayed late. Which conference rooms had the loudest conversations. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was learning, like my grandfather taught me. But then on a Thursday in October, at approximately 2:17 p.m, I was cleaning the hallway outside conference room B on the 5th floor. The door wasn't fully closed. I wasn't trying to listen, but I heard my father's voice say, "The offer is $61 million. We need to move before the quarter closes." And another voice, a woman's voice, one I'd learned to recognize later, friend named Tam, said, "Raymond, if we don't close this sale by December, everything falls apart." My stomach dropped. $61 million. They were selling the company. My company. I didn't react. I kept wiping down the hallway wall with a damp cloth, slow and steady, like I hadn't heard a thing. But inside, every single thing Grandpa Earl ever taught me clicked into place at once. I wasn't passive. I was starting. I went home that night and didn't sleep. Not because I was panicking. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't spiraling. I was thinking. Hard, fast, and in a very specific direction. Dana asked me twice if I was okay. I told her I was tired. She brought me tea, rubbed my shoulder for a minute, and went to bed. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, a legal pad, and the folder Patricia Voss had given me, and I started building a timeline. What I knew, my father was entertaining a $61 million acquisition offer. What I didn't know, who the buyer was, how far along negotiations had gotten, and whether anyone in that room, or in any room at Aldrin Coal, knew that 51% of the company couldn't legally be sold without my signature. I pulled up the Ohio Secretary of State business filings. It took about 40 minutes of cross-referencing before I confirmed what Patricia had already told me. The share transfer was recorded, quietly, cleanly, in the correct filing. 11 years after original incorporation. Earl Whitfield's name removed. Marcus James Aldrin's name added. It was real. It was legal and nobody had noticed. Or if they had, nobody had said a word. I texted Patricia at 7:04 a.m. the next morning. "They're selling $61 million offer. How fast can you move if I need you to?" She replied 4 minutes later. "Already have the file pulled. Call me after 9. God, I loved that woman. We spoke for 47 minutes. She walked me through exactly what a 51% shareholder could and could not do. I could block the sale. I could demand a full audit before any transaction closed. I could call a shareholder meeting at any time with 15 days written notice, under the terms of the original incorporation agreement. "Can they sell without me?" I asked. "Not legally," she said. "Not without committing securities fraud." "And if they didn't know I existed?" She paused. "That would be their problem, not yours." I went back to work the next day, like nothing had changed. Monday morning, 7:45 a.m, CleanCore badge, grey cart, the same lobby, the same oil painting. But now I was watching differently. I started with the 5th floor. The executive level had 6 offices. My father's corner office, a CFO named Gerald Tate, a VP of sales named Brandon Chu, a legal counsel office that rotated between 2 outside attorneys. And then, at the end of the hall, in an office that used to be a storage room, someone I hadn't seen in the public filings at all. Her name, I learned from her door placard, was Renata Cole. Cole, as in Aldrin Coal Industrial Supply. I went back to the original incorporation documents that night. The Cole in the company name was Earl's silent business partner from 30 years ago, a man named Douglas Cole, who had died in 2014. I'd assumed the name was just legacy branding at this point. A lot of family businesses keep the dead partner's name. But Renata Cole was alive and in that office every single day. and she was the woman whose voice I'd heard through the conference room door. "Raymond, if we don't close this sale by December, everything falls apart." I started paying very close attention to Renata Cole. She was around 52, sharp dresser, always structured blazers, always heels, never casual. She came in at 9 a.m. sharp and left between 6:30 and 7 every night. She had lunch delivered, usually from the same Thai place on High Street, and she ate at her desk. She took calls with the door closed and the blinds angled down. Two things I noticed within the first week of watching her. One, she never used the company's internal printer. She had a small personal printer on her credenza that she'd brought from somewhere else. Whenever she printed something, she picked it up immediately and either filed it in a locked drawer or shredded it herself. There was a personal crosscut shredder under her desk. 2. Gerald Tate, the CFO, visibly tensed whenever he walked past her office. He was a 58-year-old man with 22 years at the company. I found his LinkedIn. And he looked at Renata Cole the way people look at something they're afraid of but can't talk about. I filed both observations away and said nothing. By the third week of November, I'd established a routine that nobody questioned. 5th floor hallway, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons between 2 and 4 p.m. Conference rooms, emptied trash at 5:15 p.m, after most meetings had ended, but before the cleaning crew left. Executive bathroom adjacent to my father's office, every morning at 8:30, because he arrived at 9 and liked it clean. That last one was my best intelligence window. The executive bathroom shared a thin wall with my father's office. Not a great wall, the kind of wall that makes you understand why certain conversations shouldn't happen near it. I wasn't planting anything. I wasn't doing anything illegal. I was cleaning a bathroom and occasionally hearing things through a wall that was essentially drywall over a metal frame. On November 19th, at 8:41 a.m, I heard my father on the phone. "Gerald, I don't care what the number looks like on paper. I need that variance explained before the buyer's team arrives. If their due diligence team finds a discrepancy before we do." He stopped, listened, then lower, then fix it before Friday. Variance, discrepancy. Fix it before Friday. I took my phone out and opened the voice memo app. I set it face down on the edge of the sink, handle of my mop resting casually against the wall beside it, and kept cleaning. I wasn't recording my father to hurt him. I was protecting myself. The financial irregularities started becoming visible to me around the same time, not because I had access to internal systems, but because I was watching the physical paper trail that careless people leave when they think nobody's paying attention. On November 21st, a Tuesday, I emptied the recycling bin in the small kitchenette adjacent to the executive suite. Most of it was coffee cups and printed emails, but near the bottom, folded in half and then folded again, was a single page that someone had clearly meant to shred and hadn't. It was a vendor invoice. Letterhead read, Crestfield Solutions LLC. Invoice number 4471. Services rendered. Operational consulting. October. Amount $38,500. I photographed it with my phone before I dropped it in the bin. That night I searched for Crestfield Solutions LLC in the Ohio Business Registry, incorporated 14 months ago. Registered agent, a law firm in Dublin, Ohio that specialized in... I had to read it twice. Shell company formation. No website, no LinkedIn, no physical address beyond a UPS store in Westerville. $38,500 for operational consulting. I pulled up my notepad and wrote the number down. Then I went back through my mental inventory of the past 3 weeks. Every conversation fragment, every tense look, every closed door. And I wrote those down too. Then I circled Renata Cole's name 3 times. I called Patricia on my lunch break the next day, sitting in my car in the CleanCore parking lot, 2 blocks from the building. "I need you to run a name for me," I said. Crestfield Solutions LLC, incorporated in Ohio, 14 months ago. I heard her typing. "Registered agent is Harman and Briggs in Dublin," she said after a moment. "I know. Who's behind it?" More typing. A long pause. "I can't pull beneficial ownership from this. I'd need a forensic accountant or a subpoena." "How do we get there without tipping anyone off?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, Marcus, how many of these invoices do you think there are? I thought about it. 14 months, monthly consulting fees, if every invoice was $38,500. If it's monthly, I said, we're looking at over $500,000. And if the sale closes in December, Patricia said slowly, those records become someone else's problem, or they disappear entirely. The line went quiet. Patricia, I said, how fast can you file to block the sale? 15 days written notice, like I told you. But Marcus, before we file, I want more. I want enough that when we walk into that room, they can't just deny it and regroup. I want it to be over in one move. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. How long do I have? The offer expires January 15th, she said, which means they'll push for board approval by mid-December at the latest. It was November 22nd. I had 3 weeks. I went back to work the next morning with a different kind of focus. Not anxious, not angry, precise. I was my grandfather's student, and he had taught me that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone has already dismissed. They thought I was the janitor. Good. I had a company to save, and a thief to catch. The first week of December hit Columbus like a wall. Temperature dropped to 19 degrees overnight. The building's heating system struggled to keep up, which meant maintenance calls, which meant more foot traffic on every floor, which meant more noise, more movement, more cover. I used all of it. By December 3rd, I had photographed 11 vendor invoices from Crestfield Solutions, LL. Ni. Mira. 11 months of $38,500 payments. That was $423,500. Pulled from Aldrin Cole's operational budget, under a consulting line item that, as far as I could tell, had never been formally approved by the board. I knew this because on December 2nd, I had found something in the recycling bin, outside Gerald Tate's office, that stopped me cold. It was a printed email chain, partially torn, like someone had started to rip it and change their mind. Gerald had written to my father in September, Raymond, the Crestfield line item is still not showing board authorization in our system. Auditors will flag this if we don't resolve it before year end. I've raised this 3 times. I need direction. My father's reply 2 days later was 4 words. I'll handle it. Gerald had printed that exchange, and then, for whatever reason, hadn't shredded it. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he was building his own protection file. Either way, it was in my phone's camera roll now, crisp and clear. I forwarded everything to a new encrypted email account I'd set up specifically for this. Every photo, every voice memo, every note. 2 copies. One on a cloud drive, one on a USB drive that lived in a lockbox at my apartment. Grandpa Earl's rule. If it only exists in one place, it doesn't exist. On December 5th, something shifted. I was cleaning the hallway outside Conference Room A, the big one, the one with the long mahogany table and the projector screen, when I noticed the room had been booked solid for the following week. The calendar on the door showed back-to-back sessions, Monday through Wednesday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m, labelled simply DD Review. Due diligence. The buyer's team was coming. I stood there for a moment staring at that calendar card. They were moving faster than Patricia had estimated, which meant I had less time than I thought. I texted her from the stairwell. DD Review starts Monday. Buyer's team on site all week. Her response came in under 2 minutes. Are you somewhere safe to talk? I called her immediately. If the buyer's team is doing on-site due diligence, she said without preamble, that means they've already completed preliminary review and they're in final confirmation phase. Marcus, they may be 2 weeks from signing. Then we move now. Not yet. Her voice was firm. If we file to block before we have the embezzlement documented, Renata Cole has time to clean the trail. The sale gets blocked, yes, but she walks. Your father claims ignorance. Everyone regroups and comes after your shares through litigation. This drags out for 2 years. So what do? We need one more thing, she said. We need to connect Renata Cole directly to Crestfield Solutions. Not just circumstantially. Directly. I leaned against the cold stairwell wall and thought. Give me 72 hours, I said. I want to tell you what I did next. And I want you to understand that every single step was legal. I didn't hack anything. I didn't break into any office. I used what was available to me. Public records, visible documents, and the extraordinary access that comes with being the person everyone ignores. On Friday, December 6th, I stayed late, told my CleanCore supervisor I'd cover the evening shift for a colleague who'd called in sick. That gave me access to the building until 9 p.m. At 7:30 p.m, the executive floor was empty except for two people, Renata Cole and my father. They were in his office, door closed. I could hear the low murmur of conversation, but not the words. I cleaned slowly, methodically. I was in no hurry. At 8:12 p.m, my father left. I heard him say goodnight to Renata through the closed door. Heard the elevator, heard silence. Renata stayed. At 8:24 p.m, her office light was still on. I knocked and Two Light knocks him and said, "Sorry to bother you, just need to empty the bin." She waved me in without looking up from her screen. I emptied her trash bin in 11 seconds. In those 11 seconds, I saw three things on her desk. 1. A spiral notebook, open with a column of numbers, handwritten in blue ink. The top of the page read CF, running total. CF, Crestfield. 2. A personal cell phone face up, displaying a bank app. The account name visible at the top of the screen, Crestfield Solutions Operating. $214,880. 3. A business card, partially tucked under her keyboard, from a real estate attorney in Scottsdale, Arizona. I was out of her office in 30 seconds. In the elevator, hands steady, I typed everything I'd seen into my notes app, with the exact time, 8:24 p.m, December 6th. Then I sat in my car for a long time. Crestfield Solutions wasn't just a shell company bleeding money from Aldrin Cole's books. It was Renata Cole's exit fund. She was draining the company, covering her tracks with the sale, and planning to disappear to Arizona. My stomach didn't drop this time. I went completely cold. Because I realized, in that moment, that my father might not know. Or worse, he did know, and he was letting it happen. I called Patricia at 8:51 p.m. I told her everything I'd seen, the notebook, the bank balance, the Scottsdale card. She was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "Patricia, I'm here." A pause. "Marcus, $214,000 in an operating account for a shell company that does no actual business. That's not accounting fraud anymore. That's wire fraud, potentially federal. Can we use what I saw? You were lawfully present in that office. She invited you in. You didn't touch anything." "Yes." Another pause. "But I want more than your testimony. One person's account of what they saw on someone's desk. A good defense attorney shreds that in 20 minutes. Then I need something physical. You need something that doesn't require you to have been in that room at all." I stared through my windshield at the dark parking garage. "The invoices," I said slowly. 11 months of invoices from a shell company, the email chain where my father told Gerald to back off, the voice memo from the bathroom wall. "That's a strong foundation," Patricia said. "But the account itself, we need someone with subpoena power to pull those records officially. Otherwise, opposing counsel argues you're speculating." "Who has subpoena power?" "A federal prosecutor," she said, "or an attorney who can file a civil fraud complaint that triggers discovery. Once I file, I can depose Gerald Tate, and I suspect Gerald Tate has been waiting for someone to give him a reason to talk." I thought about the torn email in the recycling bin, the man who had written, "I've raised this 3 times and received 4 words in return." Yeah, Gerald Tate was waiting. But then came December 9th, and everything I thought I understood got turned completely upside down. I was on the 3rd floor, running a floor buffer down the main corridor, headphones in, not playing anything, just wearing them so people wouldn't try to talk to me. The buffer is loud, it's good cover. The stairwell door opened and 2 men walked out in suits. Visitor badges. Buyer's due diligence team, I assumed. They'd been in the building since Monday. They were talking quietly but walking fast, and they passed within 4 feet of me without a glance. One of them said, "The share structure is what concerns me. Legal flagged an anomaly in the original incorporation. The 51% block hasn't been voted in years. If there's a silent shareholder nobody's accounted for, this deal..." The buffer covered the rest. I kept moving, kept my face neutral. The buyer's legal team had already found the anomaly. They didn't know who the silent shareholder was, but they knew something was wrong with the share structure. And when their attorneys started pulling on that thread, they would find me before I was ready, before Patricia had filed anything, before I had control of the narrative. I turned the buffer off, pulled out my phone and called Patricia. It rang 3 times. "They know," I said the moment she picked up. "Not everything, but their legal team flagged the share structure. They're going to find me, Patricia, maybe within days." Silence. Then very calmly, "Then we don't wait for them to find you." "What does that mean?" "It means we stop playing defense." Her voice shifted, something harder underneath it now, something I hadn't heard from her before. "I'm filing the civil fraud complaint tomorrow morning, and I'm sending your father a letter by certified mail before noon." My throat tightened. "What kind of letter?" "The kind," Patricia said, "that informs Raymond Aldrin that the majority shareholder of his company is requesting an emergency shareholder meeting, and that any attempt to proceed with the proposed sale before that meeting constitutes securities fraud." The hallway was empty. The buffer sat silent at my feet. "And if he doesn't respond?" "Oh, he'll respond," she said. "They always respond." I stood there in the corridor of my father's company, mop handle in one hand, phone in the other, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not fear, not even anger. Relief. Because the waiting was over. The janitor was done cleaning up other people's messes. Patricia filed at 9:17 a.m. on December 10th. I know the exact time because she texted me the confirmation the moment it went through. Franklin County Court of Common Pleas. Civil fraud complaint. Case number 2024-CV-08841. Named defendants: Aldrin Coal Industrial Supply, Renata Coal individually, and, after a long conversation the night before where I'd pushed and Patricia had pushed back, and then agreed, Raymond Aldrin, individually, for willful concealment of a material shareholder. I stared at my father's name on that document for a long time. Then I got dressed, drove to the CleanCore lot, picked up my cart, and went to work. The certified letter arrived at Aldrin Coal's legal address at 11:43 a.m. I know this because I was on the second floor when I heard it. Not the letter itself, obviously, but the reaction to it. Sound travels differently in a building when something goes wrong. The energy changes. Doors that are usually open close. Voices that carry go quiet. By 1 p.m, my father had called an emergency meeting with his outside legal counsel. I know this because I emptied the trash in the executive kitchenette at 1:08 p.m. and heard him through his office wall, voice tight and controlled. "Get me Morrison, right now, and find out who Patricia Voss is." Morrison was David Morrison. I looked him up that evening, senior partner at a firm called Calder, Morrison and Webb. Expensive, aggressive, the kind of attorney who files countersuits before breakfast. Good. Patricia had told me to expect exactly this. "They'll come at your share transfer first," she'd said the night before, her voice unhurried like she'd done this 100 times. "They'll argue the transfer was improperly executed, that Earl lacked authority, and that there's a procedural defect somewhere. That's their only move." Is there a defect? "Marcus." She'd said my name the way a teacher says it when the answer is obvious. "I drafted that transfer personally. I notarized it. I filed it. I have the original documents in a fireproof safe and digital copies on 3 separate servers. There is no defect." I'd almost smiled. Grandpa Earl really trusted you. He trusted me because I never gave him a reason not to. A beat. Same as you. December 11th, 12th, 13th. 3 days of silence from my father's side. No response to the certified letter. No contact from Morrison's office to Patricia. Nothing. Patricia said that was normal. They're panicking internally. When attorneys go quiet, it means they're trying to find a problem that doesn't exist. I kept going to work. I know that sounds strange. But I had reasons. 1, I needed to see what was happening inside the building. 2, disappearing suddenly after 11 months would look strange and potentially tip off CleanCore management, which could create complications I didn't need. 3, and I'll be honest about this one, I wasn't ready to stop yet. I'd spent 11 months in that building. I knew every hallway, every face, every rhythm. It had become mine in a way that had nothing to do with the shares. On December 12th, I saw Gerald Tate for the first time in 2 weeks. He looked like he hadn't slept. Grey under his eyes, shirt slightly wrinkled in a way that would have been unthinkable for him a month ago. He walked past me in the hallway, and, I don't know why, he stopped. He looked at me directly, which almost nobody did. "You do a good job," he said. "This floor always looks clean." I said thank you. He nodded once slowly and kept walking. I thought about that for the rest of the day. On December 14th, Patricia called at 6 a.m. "Morrison's office reached out," she said. "They want a settlement conference. Private, before any court dates are set." "What kind of settlement?" "They want you to sell your shares back to Raymond at a negotiated price. They're prepared to offer fair market value." Their words. My jaw tightened. And the fraud? Renata Cole? The Crestfield invoices? They didn't mention any of that. Of course they didn't. Because a settlement that only addressed the shares would let Renata walk away clean. Let everything get buried under an NDA and a wire transfer. The company would sell, the buyer would take over, and $500,000 of systematically stolen money would quietly become someone's Scottsdale down payment. "Tell them no," I said. "I already did," Patricia said. "An hour ago." I paused. "You filed the response without asking me." "I filed it consistent with what you've told me your goals are. If I'm wrong, tell me now." She wasn't wrong. I told her that. "Good," she said. "Because I also filed a supplemental complaint this morning, attaching the Crestfield invoice photographs, the Gerald Tate email chain, and the voice memos. I've copied the Ohio Attorney General's office as a courtesy." I sat up straighter. "The AG's office?" "When you have evidence of systematic financial fraud involving a shell company and a pending $61 million sale that would obscure the theft, yes, you copy the AG's office. It changes the temperature of the room considerably. The shareholder meeting notice went out on December 15th. 15 days. Written notice, as required. Meeting date, December 30th, 10 a.m. at Aldrin Coal Industrial Supply's registered address. Called by Marcus James Aldrin, majority shareholder, 51%. Patricia had also, quietly, without fanfare, sent a separate notification to the prospective buyer's legal team, informing them that the sale was subject to a pending civil fraud action, and that the majority shareholder had not authorised the transaction. The buyer's team withdrew their due diligence team from the building that same afternoon. I was on the 4th floor when I watched them leave. 4 people in suits, rolling carry-on bags through the lobby, looking frustrated. The receptionist looked confused. Brandon Chu, the VP of sales, was standing near the elevators with his phone to his ear, saying nothing, just listening. The deal was bleeding out in real time. December 16th, 4:47 p.m. I was finishing up the 3rd floor when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, Columbus area code. I almost didn't answer. "Marcus," my father's voice. Low, controlled, no greeting, no preamble. I stopped walking. I leaned against the wall and kept my voice completely even. "Raymond." A pause. The first time I'd called him by his first name. He noticed. I could hear it in the half-second of silence. "We need to talk. In person." "I agree," I said. "December 30th, 10 a.m, conference room A. Before that." "No." Another pause. Longer this time. "Marcus." His voice shifted slightly. Something underneath it I hadn't expected. Not anger. Not threat. Something that might have been... I don't know. I won't romanticize it. "I didn't know about the shares, what your grandfather did. I didn't know." I stayed quiet. I let him talk. "Whatever you think I've done..." "I don't think anything," I said. "I have documentation. There's a difference." Silence. "See you on the 30th, I said, and ended the call. I stood there in the hallway for a moment. Then I called Patricia and told her my father had made direct contact. What did he say? That he didn't know about the share transfer. Do you believe him? I thought about it honestly. I think he's telling the truth about that specific thing. And the rest of it. I think he knew about Crestfield and told himself it wasn't his problem to ask questions about. Patricia made a sound. Not quite a sigh, not quite agreement. That's called willful blindness. It's not a defense. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. I kept working. I kept cleaning. The building felt different now. Charged like before a storm. People talked in lower voices. Renata Cole's blinds were down permanently. Gerald Tate had started leaving at 4 p.m. sharp every day, which he had never done before. On December 23rd, I worked my last shift at Aldrin Cole. I cleaned every floor, took my time, did it right. When I finished the 5th floor, the executive level, my father's hallway, I stood at the window at the end of the corridor for a moment and looked out at Columbus. The skyline, the river, the cold grey sky. Then I left my cart at the service entrance, returned my badge to the CleanCore supervisor, and said I was moving on to another contract. He said I'd been one of his best workers. Reliable, thorough, never complained. I said thank you, and meant it. December 26th. Patricia called. The AG's office called me this morning, she said. They've opened a preliminary inquiry into Crestfield Solutions. They've subpoenaed the bank records. I exhaled slowly. How long does that take? The subpoena gives the bank 10 business days, but they've also flagged it as a priority financial fraud case. A pause. Marcus, the AG's investigator told me, off the record, that they've seen this structure before. Crestfield's registered agent has been connected to 2 other shell companies that were used in similar schemes. Meaning Renata has done this before. Meaning, Patricia said carefully, that Aldrin Cole may not be her first company. The room went quiet around me. Does she know the AG is involved? Not yet. When will she know? Probably, Patricia said, around 10 a.m. on December 30th. I bought a suit on December 27th. Navy blue. White shirt. No tie. Grandpa Earl always said ties were for people who needed the costume to feel powerful. I tried it on in the fitting room mirror and stood there for a long moment. I didn't look like a janitor. I looked like exactly what I was. On December 29th, Patricia and I met for 2 hours at her office in Franklin County. We went through every document, every exhibit, every sequence of events. She had organised everything into a presentation binder, the kind with numbered tabs and colour-coded sections that made 11 months of quiet work look like exactly what it was. Airtight. Tomorrow, she said, sliding a copy across the table to me, you walk in there as the majority shareholder, not as someone asking for anything, not as someone proving something. You already own the room, you just haven't sat down in it yet. I looked at the binder, my name on the cover tab. Marcus James Aldrin, 51%. What if he tries to adjourn? I asked. He can't. You called the meeting. Parliamentary rules give you the floor. What if Renata doesn't show? Patricia smiled for the first time since I'd known her. Small, precise, like everything else about her. She'll show, she said. She doesn't know what we know. She thinks this is about the shares. She'll show up ready to manage a family dispute. A pause. She's going to walk into a very different room. I closed the binder. One more thing, Patricia said. Gerald Tate called my office this morning. I looked up. He wants to cooperate. He's been keeping his own file for 7 months. She folded her hands on the desk. He has internal financial reports that corroborate every Crestfield invoice, pulled directly from the company's accounting system. Timestamps, approval codes, everything. I sat back in my chair. 7 months. Gerald Tate had been quietly building his own case for 7 months, waiting for someone to walk through the door. The janitor, the CFO, and a 68-year-old attorney with a fireproof safe. My grandfather would have loved every single second of this. I set my alarm for 7 a.m. on December 30th. I slept better than I had in months. I arrived at Aldrin Coal Industrial Supply at 9:41 a.m. on December 30th. Not through the service entrance. Not with a CleanCore badge and a grey cart. Through the front door. Navy suit, black shoes I'd polished the night before. Patricia Voss walking beside me in a charcoal coat with her document case under one arm, moving like someone who had done this exact thing many times and found it mildly interesting. The receptionist, Joelle, 24 years old, always had a coffee from the place on 4th Street, had said good morning to me for 11 months without ever learning my name, looked up from her desk. Good morning. Do you have an appointment? Marcus Aldrin, I said. I called this meeting. She looked at her screen, looked back up. Something shifted in her face. Not recognition exactly, but the beginning of it, like a word you almost remember. Patricia set a copy of the meeting notice on the desk. Conference room A. We'll find our way. The room was already occupied when we walked in. My father sat at the far end of the mahogany table, to the right. Dark suit, silver cufflinks, exactly the way he looked in the oil painting downstairs. He was 61 years old, and he looked it in a way that photographs never quite captured. Something tired behind his eyes that I didn't remember from the few times I'd seen him as a teenager. David Morrison sat beside him. Late 50s, good suit, the practiced stillness of someone billing $800 an hour. Renata Cole sat across from them, structured blazer, burgundy this time. Pearl earrings, completely composed. And at the near end of the table, hands folded, a single manila folder in front of him. Gerald Tate. He looked at me when I walked in, gave one small nod. My father looked at me. I watched his face go through several things in rapid succession. Surprise, recalibration, something that might have been recognition, and then settle into careful stillness. Renata Cole looked at me the way she had looked at me every time I'd emptied her trash bin, like I wasn't there. That was the last mistake she made. Patricia took the seat at the head of the table without ceremony. I sat to her right. She opened her document case, set 3 numbered binders on the table, and looked at the room. Thank you all for being here. For the record, my name is Patricia Voss, attorney for Marcus James Aldrin, majority shareholder of Aldrin Coal Industrial Supply, holding 51% of outstanding shares via transfer from Earl James Whitfield, executed March 3, 2021, filed with the Ohio Secretary of State March 7, 2021, case reference W-2021-0044. She slid a binder toward Morrison. All documentation is in tab 1. Morrison opened it. His face stayed neutral, but his jaw moved once. A small, involuntary tightening. My father was looking at me. I looked back at him. Didn't look away. Raymond, Morrison said quietly, not looking up from the binder. My father said nothing. Before we address the proposed sale, Patricia continued, there's a secondary matter that requires the room's attention. Renata Cole shifted almost imperceptibly in her chair. Over the past 14 months, Aldrin Coal Industrial Supply has made 41 payments to a vendor identified as Crestfield Solutions, LLC, totaling $623,850. Patricia's voice was unhurried, like she was reading a grocery list. Crestfield Solutions, LLC has no employees, no operational history, no website, and no documented services rendered to this company. Its sole registered agent is a shell company formation firm in Dublin, Ohio. She slid the second binder across the table. Renata didn't touch it. The beneficial owner of Crestfield Solutions, LLC's operating account number ending in 7741 at First Merit Bank in Westerville, is Renata Ann Cole. Patricia looked up. That account currently holds $214,880. It has received every payment made to Crestfield Solutions by this company. The room was absolutely silent. Gerald Tate opened his folder and placed a single document on the table in front of him. He didn't say anything. He just put it there. Renata Cole's composure cracked. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies. It was smaller than that. A blink held half a second too long. A breath taken through her nose instead of her mouth. The hands that had been relaxed on the table moving to her lap. This is... Morrison started. The Ohio Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation into Crestfield Solutions on December 26th, Patricia said. They subpoenaed First Merit Bank records on the same date. We have been in contact with the AG's lead investigator, whose name and contact information are in tab 3. She paused. Ms. Cole, I'd strongly recommend you contact your own attorney before saying anything further in this room. Renata said nothing. She was looking at the binder she still hadn't touched. Like if she didn't touch it, none of it was real. My father spoke for the first time. Marcus. His voice was different from the phone call. Something had gone out of it. The control was still there, but underneath, something hollow. I didn't know about the shares, he said. What Earl did, I'm telling you I did not know. I believe you, I said. He blinked. Hadn't expected that. But you knew about Crestfield, I said. You told Gerald to back off in September. You told him you'd handle it. You didn't ask questions you didn't want answered, and you let $623,000 walk out of this company because asking would have made things complicated. I kept my voice even, no anger in it, just the words. That's not ignorance, that's a choice. His jaw tightened. Morrison put a hand on his arm. My client, Morrison started. Your client, Patricia said pleasantly, has been named in a civil fraud complaint filed December 10th in Franklin County. He's welcome to address that through the court process. Right now we're here for the shareholder meeting. The formal portion took 31 minutes. Patricia moved through it cleanly. Share transfer documentation authenticated. Civil fraud complaint formally entered into shareholder record. Proposed $61 million sale. Voted on by the room's shareholders. Raymond Aldrin, 49%. Vote in favour. Marcus James Aldrin, 51%. Vote against. Sale blocked. Morrison closed his notebook. He looked like a man who had billed a lot of hours on a deal that was now dead and was already calculating how to explain that to his client. My father sat very still. Renata Cole stood up without a word, picked up her bag, and walked toward the door. Miss Cole? Patricia's voice stopped her at the threshold. The AG's investigator asked me to let you know that they'd appreciate your cooperation in the coming weeks. Voluntary cooperation tends to be viewed favourably. A pause. The alternative tends not to be. Renata walked out. We heard her heels on the floor all the way to the elevator. Gerald Tate was the last to leave. He stood up, tucked his folder under his arm, and walked to my end of the table. He put out his hand. I shook it. Your grandfather came to see me once, he said. 6 years ago. Sat right down in my office and asked me what kind of company Raymond was running. He paused. I told him the truth. He thanked me and left. Gerald looked at the table, then back at me. I always wondered if that conversation went anywhere. I thought about a flannel shirt and a kitchen table, and a man who read contracts like novels. It went exactly where it was supposed to go, I said. Gerald nodded once slowly. Then he left. The legal aftermath wasn't clean or fast. It never is. The Ohio AG's office filed criminal fraud charges against Renata Cole on February 14th. Wire fraud, theft by deception, and fraudulent use of a business entity. 3 counts. Her attorney negotiated a plea in April. She agreed to full restitution of $623,850, a 5-year suspended sentence, and a permanent bar from serving as an officer or director of any Ohio corporation. She was in Scottsdale by June. Not the way she'd planned it. David Morrison filed a motion to invalidate Earl's share transfer on January 8th, citing a procedural technicality in the 2021 filing. The motion was denied on February 2nd, filed again on different grounds on February 19th, denied again March 3rd. After the third denial, Morrison withdrew from the case entirely. My father didn't file a 4th motion. Raymond and I met for coffee in March. Not at the company, a place near the Short North. Small, not crowded, the kind of place where 2 people can talk without an audience. I want to be careful about how I tell this part because I don't want to make it neater than it was. He looked older. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and didn't say anything for almost 2 minutes after we sat down. Then, I don't know how to do this. Neither do I said. I wasn't a good father. I didn't argue with that or soften it. No. He nodded, like he'd expected that. Like maybe he'd needed to hear it said plainly by someone who wouldn't let him off the hook. Earl never forgave me, he said, for what happened after your mother died, for how I handled things. I know. Did he talk about it? Not directly, but he made sure I was okay. That was his answer to it. My father looked out the window. Columbus in March. Grey sky, wet pavement. The first edge of something almost like spring. He transferred the shares to you on purpose, he said. Not just to protect you financially. I know, I said. He wanted me to have a reason to show up. Raymond looked at me. And did it work? I thought about 11 months of empty hallways and grey carts and conversations through thin walls. A janitor who was never just a janitor. Yeah, I said. It worked. I took my seat on the board of Aldrin Coal Industrial Supply on April 1st. Not as a symbolic gesture, as the majority shareholder with operational oversight. Patricia and I had spent 2 months restructuring the governance documents to reflect actual ownership and add real financial controls. Gerald Tate stayed on as CFO. We brought in a new outside auditor. We built a vendor approval process that required dual authorization for any payment over $5,000. The kind of thing that should have existed from the beginning. The kind of thing my grandfather would have insisted on. On my first day in the corner office, not my father's, I took a different one, smaller, better view of the river. I brought one thing from home and set it on the desk. A photograph. Grandpa Earl at his kitchen table, reading glasses on, a contract spread open in front of him, a cup of coffee going cold at his elbow. He's not looking at the camera. He doesn't know he's being photographed. He's just working. I sat down in my chair and looked at the Columbus skyline through the window. The company was mine. Not because I'd fought for it exactly, though I had. Not because I'd outsmarted anyone, though maybe I had. Because a man in a flannel shirt had loved me quietly and strategically for 25 years, and made sure that when the moment came, I would be ready. The janitor who owned the building. He would have liked that. I looked at the photograph one more time. A man who builds something should make sure it doesn't get taken from him while he's not watching. I wasn't watching anymore. I was in the room,